This is the voice of Paddy Hart as he remembers the rescue off the Gap.
It was a dark, moonless night, and the seas were a bit rough. We didn't have much to look for except a head bobbing, and we used searchlights to pick them up. Eventually, when we found them, we couldn't go in close enough to the bloke in the water because for fear of running over him and doing him an injury. And we were very close to shore also. So Keith Richardson hopped in and swam and picked him up. And when we dragged both of them back aboard, they were like a couple of drowned rats.
This poem is a tribute to Keith Richardson, who was mate of the chaser Change too. He was a brave family man who was knocked down and killed by a semi-trailer at Woodman's Point, West Australia in June 1984. He was just 42 years old. It was a fine example of bravery shown by Keith, and the seamanship of Captain Paddy Hart was also outstanding. The rescue off the Gap. The chaser's day was over. She was steaming back to base when a message intercepted had started off a race to try and save a tourist who'd been washed into the sea by a king wave from the Natural Bridge just south of Albany. And could they help, the plea came through, those several miles between, with fast approaching darkness and a lee shore that was mean. So Paddy Hart, the skipper of the chaser named Change too, swung helm hard down and altered course to see what he could do. They reached that treacherous area in half an hour or so. Their searchlight swept the desperate scene. The engine turned dead slow. Hell, we're too close, the skipper thought, and too much noise for sure. The engine's noise was bad enough, but the police on land made more. "Cut that radio, stop the ship, the better we can hear," yelled Paddy Hart, the skipper. Those awesome rocks so near. And now, in deadly silence, with eyes and ears all strained, they heard that feeble cry for help, the swimmer's strength near drained. "There he is," the lookout cried from high up on the mast. Young Westerberg, with the keenest eyes, had found the man at last. And that was when Keith Richardson, how brave a man could be, stripped off his clothes that awful night and dived into the sea with a lifeline round his middle and a prayer upon his lip to give him strength to reach this man and bring him back to ship. And this he did, and willing hands reached down and using care to bring them safely up on deck to rum and blankets there. Half drowned and numbed, but both alive, they made a sorry sight. They'd cheated death, but only just, that cold and wintry night. But sadness guides my pen. I write, Keith Richardson is dead, and those who worked or lived with him no doubt a tear will shed. That awful night, the chance he took, and brave beyond compare, to save the life of Stephen Matthews, a stranger from elsewhere. And all that's left, a small bronze plaque that's mounted at the Gap, an interest for the tourist, a speck upon a map. I was born in Wales and ran away from my ship in Port Adelaide in 1928. I was just 16 and a half, skinny, 5 feet tall, and weighed just under 8 stone. Things were very tough in Port Adelaide at that time. There were troops keeping law and order, rioting between wharfies and scabs, food rationing, no dough, and no work. Springtime came, and I took to the track with a very small swag. I finally got a job with a cocky up in the Adelaide Hills at a place called Wintry Hill, where I learnt farming, road work, well sinking, wood cutting, and worked in spot mills. This poem still brings back some very sweet memories of the bush. I got to love the bush. In those days, the bush was truly a beautiful place to live and work in, and I felt I belonged. Bush memories. Depression time in 1928. I took to the bush with a seaman's gait. Away from my ship, poor food, low pay, to a sunburnt land and a friendly way. 100 jobs, 100 tracks. I've worked with whites and I've worked with blacks. But most I miss is a dinkum mate and a good bag camp, as my home relate. Bushed up sides and a good bag fly, with a good steep pitch to keep things dry. 7 feet by 8 was big enough. With chaff bag beds, you need be tough to stand that sag and get up bent like a boomerang, and not relent because of heat, sand, bloody flies, barcoo rot, or bunged up eyes. When out of smokes, you've nearly cried, and searched for butts you may have flicked out wide. Perhaps the lining of your coat may yield some butts, the chance remote, to build yourself a skinny fag that starts you off to cough and gag, induced by gum leaves, tea leaves too, and rolled in newspaper sometimes had to do. I miss the dust, then the fragrance that comes with the lovely rain, the old bush life, all sweat, small gain, and the comradeship of a good mate won while cutting 6-foot wood 3 bob a ton. I miss the campfire, bushman made, 2 forks, a rail, wire hooks arrayed at different heights adjust for heat, and camp oven, billy, make complete the total gear required to cook an Irish stew or a stolen chook. The hole for cooking damp was made, and a chaff bag safe hung in the shade of a handy stringy bark growing near to keep out blowflies. There's bloody millions there, and axes, crosscut, wedges, maul, under cover. There was room for all in the good back camp, just 7 feet by 8, up at Humbug Scrub with a good bush mate. This next poem is satirical and describes the first landing of migrants in South Australia on Kangaroo Island. South Australia was convict-free. The voyage from London took over 6 months on a small ship called the Duke of York, and they landed at a place on the island called the Spit. I had been painting a 135-foot-long historical mural in the Queen's Cliff Hotel at the time, and I thought it would be fitting to add a bit of verse, which I quite often did. A few of the locals in the public bar, who obviously didn't understand the satire, said it didn't happen like that, but I believe they appreciate it now at this stage of the game. The poem was neatly painted on a canvas plaque hung near the reception desk, and is still well photographed. The first landing on KI. The Duke of York eased from her berth and caught the ebbing tide. 3 cheers rang out from Tilbury Wharf, and many stood and cried. Ahead lay dangers no one knew on wild tempestuous seas. They prayed, "Oh God, deliver us from hunger and disease." How brave these souls, their boats so small, and bound for alien shores. They'd all been screened at London town, no convicts, pimps, or whores. Around the Cape, across the Bight, then glorious smell of land. They dropped anchor then behind a spit of stunted scrub and sand. And this was how the migrants came and landed on KI. A little girl, the first ashore, a sailor held her dry. A working party cut a track and made for higher ground. The ring of axes filled the bush, it was a joysome sound. They topped the hill but couldn't grasp the sight that met their eyes, and 2 were there, had to have bridges changed, so great was their surprise. For there it was, and to a man, down on their knees they fell. For the first word spelt out Queenscliff, and the second word hotel. They all raced in through noise and smoke. The barman's name was Fred. yelled, "Strike me bloody lucky, we'd given you up for dead." The boatswain shouted for the mob. It cost him 4 and 10. He shouted all the women too, as well as all the men. And so the counter lunch was on, a favourite, wallaby stew. Washed down with beer, it tasted beaut. Complainers there were few. Relieving barmaid came in then, her nickname Sloppy Lil. She had 4 kids from various ones because there was no pill. A pleasant soul, she knew her job and told hilarious tales to those who showed an interest, but mostly these were males. The migrants mixed and soon made friends, a dry and hungry lot. The ordeal of that 6 months' trip soon left behind, forgot. And this was how the settlement on KI first began. The locals' pub had played its part, and so had Skin by a Stan, along with others round the bar who told them what to do, like how to make a damper and skin a kangaroo. Look out for snakes and centipedes, and watch those bloody ants. They're 1 inch long. They bite like hell and can sneak into your pants. And if you've got a whinge or two with transport or the like, we'll get a demonstration going or try and start a strike. So take time off, you tourists, between your drinks and all, and give some thought to the pioneers, long dead beyond recall, who made this island possible through yakka, sun and sand, for you to stand on carpet with a Foster's in your hand. I was invited to write this next poem for the Stirling Festival and 1983 centenary celebrations, while I painted the 450-foot historical mural through the freeway tunnel at Arbury Park after the big Ash Wednesday bushfire. Ash Wednesday in the hills. Ash Wednesday was the name they gave the day the big one came. The searing heat, smoke, wind and dust, horrific wall of flame. And many souls were in the path of that demon spawned from hell. Farmers, children, CFS, and all were known so well. And weary men made sacrifice, despair, but never defeat, fought on through flames and acrid smoke 3 days without retreat. And some lost friends, and some lost all, when only ash was found to mark the place where a home had been, deserted, blackened ground. But now, with winter's healing rains, and nature starts repair, the trees all shooting with new growth, and green most everywhere, a spirit of new hope is born. Most families still remain to work with a will on that ravaged land to start their life again. I was 54 years illegal in Australia, but I took advantage of a recent amnesty, so now I'm able to consider myself a fair dinkum Australian, and I'm proud of it. Drive carefully and a safe trip home. Down in the deep, the greatest mammals left on this earth communicate. The following rescue is about only one of the sea rescues off Albany. There were others, and all voices and sound effects are authentic. A lot of people would never have heard about what happened out on the sea that day during whaling operations of the Chains Beach Whaling Company. The chaser, Chains 3, was 50 miles out from Albany when it happened. It had been a bad day right from the start. Recoil problems with the gun, and now there's strong northeaster coming in. Water was breaking over the gun deck occasionally when they came up on a small pot of sperm whales and gave chase. Captain Stubbs went forward to stand behind his gun, selected the largest whale as his target, and closing at a range, he fired. During the ensuing excitement, he hadn't noticed that the forerunner, which was the heavy nylon rope made fast to the harpoon, had washed away from its coiled-down position forward, and a big bight, or a loop of this forerunner, had washed back around his feet. Had he have glanced down, he would have immediately seen the danger, but he didn't, and this is how the accident happened.
It was fairly rough, with water washing around the gun deck. I stepped across into the bight on the forerunner, and that was it. It took my leg off as clean as a bloody whistle.
They had 1 foot the wrong side of this forerunner, and the 130-pound weight harpoon left that gun at such speed that it literally sawed his leg off in a matter of seconds flat and tossed it into the sea. He was smashed to the deck, blood flying everywhere, and in danger of being washed over the side. Paddy Hart was the first man to reach Stubbsy, who was floundering around badly, and he was able to hold on to him until further help arrived, and they were able to get him off the gun deck to safety. A tourniquet was applied to what was left of his leg, the shore station contacted by radio, and John Bell, the spotter pilot, directed to the area. John circled round in the little float plane, which could only carry 2 men, and immediately dropped a small, round, rubber survival raft, which was grabbed by the crew of the chaser and taken to the lee side. He then came down on this very rough water and waited. The crew of the chaser lowered Stubbsy over the side into this little survival raft, and the chief engineer climbed in too to help him across to the float plane, which was pitching and rolling around in the most hazardous manner 200 yards from the chaser. They tried to paddle across using a couple of pieces of packing case, but were soon exhausted as the little raft was not made to row or paddle. Paddy Hart, who was a strong swimmer and at that time a deckhand, could see that they were in big trouble, and he immediately dived in and pushed and pulled them across to the plane, which was a tremendous feat of endurance in itself, especially with the thought of sharks hanging around. Stubbsy, up to that time, had taken 4 morphine tablets and wasn't in great pain, just shock. How they ever got him into that plane, I wouldn't know, but they did. The chief climbed in too to support him and to release the tourniquet now and then. By this time, another chaser had arrived on the scene and took up position to help try and break down the waves, both chasers pumping out oil at the same time. The first attempt to get off that water failed. They bounced a good 12 feet in the air and crashed back onto the sea. It is now obvious that the little plane had too much weight. The chief had to be offloaded, and this presented just another problem as he couldn't swim. So John had to do a lot of extra manoeuvring to get as close as possible to the survival raft. The chief had to jump in and was lucky enough to be close enough for Paddy to grab him and bundle him aboard. The raft was then pulled back to the chaser and safety. With a third attempt at getting off the water, with the engine fairly screaming off its mountings, they crashed through some waves, nearly capsized, but got airborne. The chaser's crew reckoned they had Buckley's chance of getting off that water, and Stubbsy told me that he was quite prepared to die, and very dimly remembered seeing pale blue water filling the windows on either side as they broke through the top of a wave. It took a half an hour to get into Emu Point, where an ambulance was waiting to transport him to Albany Regional Hospital, and where Dr. Fitzpatrick patched him up. When the float plane was checked over, it was found that the starboard wing was buckled. Quite a few inches had broken off the tip of this wing, and one of the studs holding the wing to the fuselage had fractured. The engine was also heard to misfire on the actual point of getting airborne, so they could have been very lucky, and it was only the skill of the pilot that made the rescue possible. Stubbsy was fitted with a wooden leg, and at a later date went back to finish whaling operations with a final tally of over 4,000 whales. The drone of the little float plane, the calling of the gulls, the cry from the lookout,
there she blows, off the starboard bow,
the engine room telegraph ringing for full speed ahead, and the clattering of the powerful steam winches are gone, and peace prevails on our waters once more between man and these friendly giants of the deep. I would like to hope that my poem may help perpetuate the bravery of all these men who are personal friends, a part of Albany's colourful history, and should not be forgotten.
CBW to KX, 5 lengths ahead, going left, steady, steady, 4 lengths ahead now and coming up slowly, steady, steady, Roger, John, Roger.
This is about a whaling man. A whaling man was he. He made his living shooting whales south of Albany. If things went wrong, he cursed his crew and he cursed the whales beneath. Very hard man was Captain Stubbs, with the softest part, his teeth.
Take a bloody turn around the captain, you silly bastard.
Some days, if gales were blowing hard and the sea outside too rough, they'd all be in the Star Hotel, a motley crew and tough. Around the bar, through noise and smoke, they'd give a roaring cheer if Stubbsy shouted for the mob, with rum chased down with beer. It happened on one stormy day, so close he couldn't fail. A big sperm bull was in the sights, a monster of a whale. But as he fired, he stepped across fast-running forerunner line. It burnt his leg off below the knee and tossed it into the brine. The spotter pilot, named John Bell, who risked his life that day, snatched Stubbsy from most certain death, way out from Frenchman's Bay. He tried 3 times to lift her clear. That last and desperate try, the little float plane smashed its way through waves and screamed into the sky. Stubbs went back with a wooden leg to stand behind his gun. 4,000 odd his tally stood, but now his whaling's done. Every story has an end. This one of man and sea, Captain Stubbs, the cook and crew, all men from Albany. He cursed his stump, the poor bloody cook, the crew, and he cursed the whales beneath. A very hard man was Captain Stubbs, with the softest part, his teeth. The whales came back because the harpoon's gone. It's the end of all that blood and pain, and they trust once more, these beautiful warm-blood friends, and their sea is free again. Their deep sea is free once again. 57 years old now, and this is my second tape that I've ever attempted, the first and the bloody last. The only logical reason why over the last 2 years this didn't send my hair grey is that what is left is white anyway. I was an inaugural working shareholder at the whaling station and was there at the start of the construction. I cut and carted most of the carry piling and was also the powder monkey, blowing out a large recess in the sloping rock to house the digesters. When we finally got the plant going, the manager, Fred Edmonds, saw fit to give me the most prestigious job on the station in recognition of my work. And this was cleaning out these bloody digesters with a character from New South Wales by the name of Whispering Smith. There were 2 of these cylindrical digesters installed horizontally and were roughly 20 feet by 7 feet in diameter, with a big shaft running through the centre with offset arms that rotated and stirred up the blubber during the cook. The blubber was fed into a hatch in the top deck, and a small round door in the front of the digesters provided access for us to crawl inside to bog out the residue of the cook with short-handled shovels. What with crawling around these arms, shoveling the back stuff 3 times to get it out, on our knees amongst all the oil and heat, getting the shovels continually snagged on rows of rivet heads standing up 1.5 inches high, it was a bugger of a job, with temperatures ranging between 60 and 70 degrees sometimes. The shafts were turned by an old Fordson Major tractor on blocks, and in the early stages did an excellent job. We had a construction foreman from Norway by the name of Sig Nielsen, who did an excellent job too. The rest of the workers were locals, with a sprinkling of new Australians, and they were all good workers. Some of the locals called me Carry Jack, which I didn't mind. I found that my command of 3 languages now stood me in good stead: English, badly broken Norwegian, and foul. I sailed on 4 Norwegian tankers during World War II, and the Norwegians were a good mob.